Hey everybody, what are you saying? Welcome back to the channel. Once Gearbox released the Handsome Jack cutout, I wanted to do a bit of testing on some things that I was a bit confused on or just wasn't entirely sure how they worked. Some things I had a kind of an idea of, but it was just difficult to really test in a controlled environment because you always had to go out and find certain enemies. So I wanted to just kind of take some of this that I discovered and put it in a video for you guys just to kind of show you how some different things work, some things you might have questions about, or once again, kind of like me, you might have an idea of how it works, but just wanted maybe some clarification. And I use the term that I discovered. I don't mean like I'm the first person to do this or this isn't out there, but so a lot of this is just going to be, in one central location so you can see. It's going to be a little bit scatterbrained. It's not like it's going to have any particular rhyme or reason to, maybe why I chose certain things, just certain things that matter to me, and want to test them out. And like I said, just kind of share with you guys what some of the numbers were. The first one I wanted to test was personal space to see what the drop-off was based on how far you are from the target, what the drop-off is in damage. So here I start far and then work my way closer to the target with just a neutral gun here. It's a sniper rifle, and I wanted to see what the damage difference was. So as you can see, the drop-off isn't like there's no cutoff point as far as I could tell. It's just a gradual decrease, and I'm not too far from the cutout in this instance, and the damage is pretty significant. So, and then this is without any damage modifiers or skill points or anything, so you can imagine that this increases when you do things, when you factor all that in, and when you factor in crit bonuses and such. All that is going to be more drastically affected by the decrease in damage that you experience. But on the flip side, it's not like you have to be right on top of the target in order to get, the insane amount of damage, and then if you move away like 5 feet, it drops off significantly or anything like that. This next one I was really interested to try out because I've used terror a lot in the past, but I wasn't entirely sure what the damage increase was. The anointment just says when you're terrified you gain bonus damage, and the more terrified you are, the higher that damage. I wanted to put that to the test here and see exactly what those numbers were.
Almost done.
I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit disappointed at the overall damage, I guess. I mean, you can look at it on one hand and say you're getting almost 1,000 increase in damage, out of versus 5,000, you're almost getting 6,000 with this particular gun I'm using. But it at least wasn't as high maybe as I thought it was. Still very useful, and I love my terror builds, but I was a bit surprised that it wasn't, I guess, maybe higher. Especially in light of the fact that now you're going to need to have certain anointments to actually apply terror to yourself. So because the event itself was not permanent and there are no further ghosts in the world, at least until next year. And not only did I want to test the damage of terror, I wanted to test what the fire rate increases were. So here you are. Now moving on to the new shield you can get from the Malawan takedown. I wanted to test what the amp damage effects were on it. Tried to, just use it in practice to see, and I wasn't being super impressed by it, so I wanted to take it here and actually see, well, what's the added damage output that I'm getting. As you can see here, it's quite substantial. It does add quite a bit extra damage. It is only one shot, so I don't see this being a particular use to me unless it has an anointment that gives me, say, bonus radiation damage or fire damage like my other shield does. In that case, it would be, I think, highly useful to use, but still, regardless, it does have quite a high damage output, at least for that first shot. Out of all the tests I did, this one was most surprising to me, and I think one of the most important of them in terms of creating massively overpowered builds that do well at Mayhem 4. This is the anointments that give you plus 50% bonus elemental damage. They have them in fire, shock, corrosive, cryo, and radiation. I went ahead and tested all of them here, and then I also had a shield that gives me radiation, and I combined that with the grenade I had, which had an anointment, which gives me the bonus for fire damage. What I wanted to see was that when you use the skill Infusion for Amara, what I noticed is that the elemental damage that gets infused into your gun takes away from its regular base damage. So the mag here, as you can see, it normally does about 5,000 so damage, and then it does about 15,000 with critical. So if you had used the skill Infusion, it would get reduced. I noticed that, say, the 5,000 would get reduced to like 3-something thousand, and then the rest was converted to elemental damage. So I wanted to see if that was the case with these anointments, and it's not. The bonus damage you get is stacked on top of the base damage of the gun. So what that means, and hopefully you can see it here, I'm trying to get different angles so you can see the numbers, but you effectively are just adding on extra damage to your gun. So instead of, say, the 5,000 that I'm getting with the Maggie, when I use like fire damage from the fire anointment, it's adding then plus 50% damage. And since the Handsome Jack cutout operates as, like, flesh, the fire does even more bonus damage. So you can see here that, if this were an enemy that was just flesh at this point, didn't have a shield or armor, it's almost giving me the same damage as I get for the Maggie with fire damage. So let me rephrase. It's giving me almost double damage because I'm doing 5,000 something damage with my Maggie, and then I'm doing like 3,000-4,000 with the fire damage, and that's added on top of it. So I'm almost doing 10,000 damage just by having this grenade, which gives me this anointment. It's a little bit less for, the shock and the corrosive and cryo. That's just because they're not, especially effective against flesh. Most of them I think were around the 2,000 or 3,000 mark, whereas fire was the most, like I said, and that's because the cardboard cutout operates as just a flesh enemy. So what this means is that if you stack 3 of these, that's the most, as far as I can see, that you could stack. You could have 1 on your shield, 1 on your grenade, and then 1 on your gun. You are adding 3 additional ways that your damage is increasing. So let's just assume, for example, that you have shock and fire and, say, corrosive. Well, that means you're covered for any of the instances you might come across. If the enemy is shielded, well, you're going to get extra bonus damage from the shock. If they're a fleshy enemy, you're going to get the bonus damage from the fire, and if they're armored, you're going to get the bonus damage from the corrosive. So at least, for something like the Maggie, you're almost getting double damage from that one anointment. That doesn't take into account the other 2, which are adding almost, they're, like I said, in the 2,000 to 3,000 range. For a 5,000 base damage of the gun, you're gaining basically another 100% worth of damage. Now, I don't think it's as good as, say, having the 2 like I do. I have the anointments on my shield and my grenade, and then I have the anointment for phase slam and phase cast damage, extra damage with the gun. I think that's, better in the long term. But still, the point is that it's just absolutely insane how much extra damage you can get with these. And they seem, if you just look at them, they don't seem like they're all that great. It's just like, oh wow, plus extra 50% damage. That's great. In testing it, the Maggie, I was able to get, I believe it's with the phase slam anointment that I have with the Maggie, I'm able to get up to 160, 180,000 damage, just base damage, with critting, with a critical hit. When you factor in the fire damage and the radiation damage I can get, which are, tied to those 2 anointments from my shield and my grenade, I'm also gaining an extra 100-something thousand damage from the fire. And then I'm getting another, tens of thousands of extra damage with the radiation. So if you've seen my video where I'm going through the takedown on Mayhem level 4, and just, for the most part, you can shred through enemies. Staying alive is more the issue, just getting enough health back. But in terms of damage output, it's so easy to just shred through the enemies because you're dealing, an extra 100-something thousand damage in this setup that I have with Amara. So, like I said, this was the most surprising to me and the most exciting because it's insane how much extra damage it adds, because it's not taking away from the base damage of the gun and converting it like, you know, infusion does. It's just adding that on top of it. So really cool. Definitely keep an eye out for these, and see, if you haven't already, see how you can incorporate them into your builds, because they're just insanely powerful and fun. And just as a closer examination of infusion, I know I talked about it in the previous test as I was describing those new anointments, but here's more of a look you can see where, in a direct comparison for what infusion does. As good as infusion, you know, can be, it really kind of opened my eyes as to when I just throw some points into an infusion, it is affecting the base damage of your gun, because it's not adding to it like these anointments are. It is converting some of your base damage to that elemental damage. So in this case with shock, as I'm demonstrating here, I actually output less damage, you know, to a flesh type enemy here than I would with the base damage of the gun without infusion. That's because shock is not as effective against flesh enemies. So I'm doing, I think, about 2,800 or, you know, 2,900 damage here, maybe 3,000, but you can see without it I'm doing like 3,200 damage. So, you know, this changes when I put the fire action skill element on, because that's more effective against the flesh, you know, enemy type, which is what the cardboard cutout is. And it would change to, if you had an enemy that had shields, then obviously that shock damage would be more. But it just to me, it kind of opened my eyes that if I'm running this setup where I'm using these anointments, I don't need to use infusion at all, because I'm getting bonus elemental damage when I have these anointments anyway. It's being, in a sense, infusion to my gun, and it's being infused in a better way because it's adding damage. It's not actually taking away base damage. So when I'm running this, I don't have to put any points into infusion. I don't have to get the capstone skill, nothing, because I just don't need it. Something else I wanted to test was if swapping your weapons affects an anointment on your gun. Say if your gun gets increased damage or whatever effect it is after using your action skill, a particular action skill. If you swap weapons and then swap back to it, do you still get that anointment to be procced? And turns out it doesn't. I kind of figured this was the case, but my playstyle often would not reflect that. I would, you know, sometimes proc my Brainstormer with Phase Slam, because that's the anointment I have, and then I might switch to a Recursion or Trevinator and then switch back. And I've since realized that that's not necessarily the best strategy to do until the anointment has run its course on the particular gun that I've procced with my action skill. So just something to keep in mind, that if you do have guns that are anointed with these particular anointments like I have, they don't remain procced if you swap weapons. So just keep that in mind. So for this next test, I was pretty certain that I knew already what was going to be the result, but I wanted to test it anyways. For the anointments that say after using Phase Slam, you get a damage increase by 300%, I wanted to see if that worked with any of the other action skill variances within the Brawl skill tree, or if it was tied purely to the Phase Slam, which is the initial one that you get. And as you can see, the results are mixed. With Fracture, it does not proc the anointment, but for Downfall, it does proc the anointment. So unfortunately, my idea I had just, you know, one day thinking was that Fracture has a lower cooldown time, so why not use that versus Phase Slam and get those awesome anointments? But alas, it is not to be. On the other hand, if you're just dying to use Downfall, well, know that it does proc your Phase Slam anointment, so there is that. And in this one, it's just the opposite. I went through and tested all the different action skill variances within the Mystical Assault skill tree. I was pretty positive. I knew what the result of this was going to be based on how many of these I've used, but I don't find myself really using the last one, the one that does the explosive damage, so threw that one in there. And as expected, since these are all some kind of variant of Phase Cast, all of them do proc the Phase Cast anointment for 250% bonus damage. And as I wrap up the video here, this is just some differences with my particular setup that I use for my Maggie or pretty much any Jacob's weapon. I have a nice class mod that gives me plus 45% critical hit damage with my Jacob's weapons, and I usually throw that sucker on. And I just wanted to show you guys what types of damage you can get with the particular shield I have. It's got that radiation anointment on it, so if I throw that on there and then throw the grenade anointment with the fire, extra fire damage, you can see just the insane amount of DPS you can get versus say like the amp shield. The amp shield I have does output insane amounts of damage for that first shot especially, but then after that you don't get it. So if you're looking to, you know, do one-shot builds and stuff, certainly give this amp shield a go around, especially if you can get it anointed with, say, you know, a fire, this anointment with like fire damage, you know, something like that with Grave Ward or any other bosses that, you know, suffer from fire damage. Going to be extremely powerful and just kind of fun to use. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. I hope you found this enjoyable and informative. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could smash that like button, share this video with your friends. I'm almost to 700 subscribers. Can't believe that I've gotten that much. Certainly never thought that would ever occur and that anyone would give a hoot about what I upload. So thank you guys so much for your support. It's been great. Definitely trying to push towards that 1,000 mark. So if you haven't, consider subscribing for more content like this. And I will see you guys in the next installment.